We'll jump into today's episode right after this announcement. For over 13 years, something remarkable has been happening. Rural hospitals and other small healthcare organizations that have partnered with Capstone have been achieving results and forming workplace cultures that even we are blown away by. It is truly a game changer when rural hospitals are the provider of choice and employer of choice so they can keep care local and margins strong. Far more healthcare organizations need to experience what's possible. That's why we're stepping forward in a bigger way, expanding our team of experts, expanding our capabilities by adding a strategic planning division to expand our ability to help even more rural hospitals and other healthcare organizations in 2026 and beyond. Capstone will continue to be the partner that small healthcare organizations can count on to meet them where they're at and guide them towards a stronger future. You can learn more at capstoneleadership.net.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzloff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage.
Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. It is me, Sue Tetzloff, co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions and host of the podcast. And today I have the delight of having a guest in the studio. And as usual, when we do, we have them introduce themselves, maybe a little bit about themselves, the company that they work for. And then we're going to jump into a great conversation around culture and healthcare. Welcome, Christina. Take it away.
Hi, Sue, and thank you again so much for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I'm Christina Hazekamp. I have a background in clinical nutrition as well as a master's in public health. Really started my journey as an inpatient dietetic technician, providing bedside diet education and nutrition evaluation at a hospital here in Lansing, Michigan. And through my time there, I really started to see the systems level work that is really underpinning a lot of the care delivery and continuum of care issues that we face in healthcare. So I decided to pursue my master's in public health, and through that had some different academic research roles, but primarily established a really strong interest in quality and safety work, particularly quality improvement. And so as I just started to explore that as a more formal career path, I was introduced to some of the clinical founders of the iPath Institute, where I now work, and actually started my journey with the company as a program manager and employee number 2, since we were very much in startup mode at that time. So I've worn many hats in my 9 years or so with the organization to really partner directly with our clients as they plan and roll out their iPath implementations. I've had the opportunity to grow our team, improve our implementation processes, and now actually serve as the vice president of client operations for the organization. So my primary focus is really scaling our implementation efforts, building our team to really partner with our client organizations and ensure that they're successful in their iPath journey. So that's a little bit about my background and the role that I have. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about the iPath Institute as well. We were founded in 2016 following a Harvard Business School, Harvard Medical School Health Acceleration Challenge that the iPath study group entered, following a lot of the work that they began in 2008 to improve and standardize handoff communications, and ultimately published a series of papers in the New England Journal and in JAMA, and really scaling this work across a single center, a 9-center, multi-center study, and then a 32 hospital study in partnership with the Society for Hospital Medicine. And really what they found ultimately is you can reduce handoff-related harms by up to 47% when you're implementing a structure like iPath. And so they presented this to the HVS HMS Medical Acceleration Challenge and sort of got this advice, if you will, to say, hey, why don't you start a company, take on some investment, build some tools to scale this process? Because we know grant money is very finite, and organizations who may want to do this work might be unable to do that. So really the goal of IPASS as the Patient Safety Institute and as a commercial entity is to support the effective and multidisciplinary implementation of IPASS at scale within hospitals and health systems. So we do also have additional partners in the medical education space, undergraduate medical education and residency programs as well, but primarily focus on our work with hospitals and health systems.
I am so surprised that I have not met you sooner. We're in the same state and our work kind of crosses over each other. I was just so delighted, Christina, when we met at a recent ACHE event in Grand Rapids. And right away, when you introduced yourself and you said, I work at the IPASS Institute, I'm like, what? So a lot of our partner organizations that Capstone works with is familiar with our approach to not just handoff communication, but 12 positive communication standards, one of which is safe handoffs. And we challenge them to adopt a systematic way, an organization-wide standard way to do handoff communication. And some of them have chosen IPASS. And so I've never really kind of really explored the connection between the very specific work that your company has really created and developed and researched and proven is such a great way to improve handoffs and safety and quality. And the other reason I'm surprised we haven't met before is I too really fell in love in healthcare with quality and risk management and safety early in my career as a nurse. And my first step into leadership was in that area. And once you go there, you just can't take it out of you, Christina, can you? It's like, and then you find your soul sisters and brothers out there that are just like you. And that's right. Like instantly, I'm like, I love this girl.
Yeah, so, it becomes part of your DNA, I think.
Yeah. We find each other. And so I'm so glad we found each other. And I'm glad that you're able to come on the show today and share some of what you and your company have been doing to improve handoff communication. And really, because this is a podcast about culture, I really want to dive into first, I think maybe a little bit more about, before we dive into the implications on things like teamwork and coworker behaviors and how handoff communication supports that being more positive and helpful. IPASS. Tell us more about what is IPASS? I know it's a handoff communication, but IPASS, it means something. So go for that and fill in that blank for us.
Yeah, happy to. So IPASS is a mnemonic, a 5-part mnemonic that stands for illness severity, patient summary, action list, situation awareness and contingency planning, and synthesis by receiver. So just to break those down a little bit further, illness severity is just a high-level one-word statement about the current status of the patient. Are they somebody who's stable? Are they kind of a watcher, want to keep an eye on them, or are they unstable and really need to either change a level of care or need something very significant to be addressed? So that's the illness severity statement, really gets the attention from the receiving clinician on here's the high level about the patient. We then move into the patient summary, where the clinician who's giving handoff really restates any key information about the admission, any changes that have occurred during shift. This could include orders that have been resulted or labs that have been resulted, any changes in the patient condition, et cetera. And then we get into the action list, which is really, here are the things that we need to look toward for the next shift as sort of a to-do, not really as a dictatorial component of communication between two clinicians, but really to confirm this is what I see needs to be done. Let's ensure we have a shared mental model. And then situation awareness and contingency planning is really kind of the high level if-then about this patient and specific to that patient. If a certain lab is resulted and it is out of the normal bounds, ensure that you consult or then you consult XYZ service. So just ensuring, again, that there's a shared mental model there of key things to look out for. Then there's synthesis by receiver, which is really message sent, message received. If I'm the oncoming clinician and I'm receiving this patient, I take a brief moment to synthesize the key aspects of the patient summary that I heard in the handoff, and just to ensure that there's a clear understanding about the patient and their current status between the clinicians at that point of transition. We sort of sometimes liken the synthesis by receiver to kind of a takeout order. When you order takeout, somebody on the other side of the phone is going to say, so I got 2 cheeseburgers, 1 with pickles, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to make sure that they got it right. So that's really what the synthesis by receiver is doing. And it's not always a component of communication that's natural to folks. So that is always an interesting piece of the mnemonic structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one thing to communicate, it's another to know it was received. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of write and read back in the day when we hand wrote orders from providers, verbal orders. We wrote them and had to read them back to make sure that they were written correctly and documented correctly. Yeah, very similar. Or teach back, which is another form of communication for patient instruction to make sure that they did indeed. Yeah, so very grounded in lots of practice in other areas, but really important in handoff communication for sure. So I can just see it right now, what you're describing with the use of iPass between, 2 clinicians, caregivers, is that just has to create a different type of teamwork between individual coworkers or even between departments and shifts even. So what are you seeing like when you have organizations implement and start using iPass? What are some of the things that I guess it's not as maybe statistically countable, but you can observe it, it's qualitative. What are you seeing as the positive ripple effects on teamwork behaviors?
Yeah. So implementing iPass starts to really create this shared expectation and ensure clarity about a patient and really build that shared mental model. So oftentimes a language may not already exist for certain components of that mnemonic structure. You may say, oh, so-and-so is circling the drain today instead of so-and-so is a watcher. And we all have a shared understanding of what that means. So it establishes that shared language for clarity and consistency, not even just within a single unit, but even across specialties. When you need to transfer a patient from the floor to the ICU, from the ED to the floor, it just creates that shared predictability in the communication structure and really helps reduce cognitive load. I know that if I'm hearing my illness severity statement, I have a clear definition in my mind of what that means about the level of acuity for this patient. I know if I hear if, then this is a situation awareness and a contingency plan that I need to be aware of. So it reduces that cognitive load as well. And as we go through that 8-part implementation process, you can really uncover other root causes that are present and contributing to communication barriers, other workflow considerations that need to be addressed in tandem. Oftentimes, we implement what we call a written tool. So sometimes it's in the EMR, sometimes it's on paper, but it's just having a visual structure in front of you of that IPASS and the components of patient information that are being handed off. And we'll uncover sometimes that there's 8 different handoff tools in one unit among nurses. And we'll say, whoa, let's, take a step back and look at all of these and what's the most important components of each of these and how do we align that into the iPass structure? So we get through some of those other workflow pieces through our process very naturally. And I would also be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that the patient is really part of the care team as well. And we're actually beginning to see a lot of initial data that points to improvements in patient experience when the handoff of their care is more structured, and especially when they have an opportunity to participate in that conversation, to provide clarity, ask questions when they need to, et cetera. And so we're already seeing a few organizations reporting increases in their patient experience scores after implementing iPass, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I can see that where that would be the case for sure. So there's the employee experience bump, the teamwork, that elevates, but then, the impact of that on the patient too and their experience. I certainly can see the value in both of those areas. I know that, when you're describing the implementation and there might be 8 current ways that handoffs are completed in one unit alone, and now we want to standardize, or maybe there really, has never been a clear way, and now we're saying, okay, we're going to have this one better way. Sometimes that can be perceived in, my experience of being part of leading changes where we're working with employees and saying, okay, there's a new, better way. Used to do it this way, now do it this way. Or they don't have a way, and now we're adding this one new way to do something, where sometimes there's that resistance. That's just human. I mean, what I've learned is that it's human, that people are going to resist, even if the research and the proof shows, and even if they believe it's better, it's still going to be hard for them because they feel like it's one more thing, it's extra work, it'll add time versus save time. So I'm sure you've seen so many flavors of this kind of resistance come up when iPass is in the process of being adopted in a unit, entire organization, multi-organizations. What can you speak to there, Christina, about how to approach this in a way that eases that change process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like this question because it's one of the first sort of topics that we often address with a new organization is what are some of the barriers and the perception of your team when it comes to changing their workflows around handoff communication. And especially for groups who already have a handoff process or a handoff tool or even 8 handoff tools. One thing that we spend a lot of time sort of emphasizing is that this is really meant to enhance your current process, not create more work. You're already having a communication about a patient when you're transitioning their care to another clinician. This is a structure for that information. So really understanding that this is meant to enhance their workflow and not add additional documentation or add additional steps in the process, if you will. And another interesting sort of data point that we saw at a health system we were working with, as part of their initial pilot, they ended up collecting data on nursing overtime before and after iPass implementation. They reduced their nursing overtime by 70%. And
that's a win.
Yeah. Yes, a big win. And so I think it sort of drove home this point that not only do we have data from the original iPass study group that this ultimately was time neutral, sort of pre and post implementation, but we're also starting to see data that this can reduce the overtime. Folks want to go home at the end of their shift. Let's ensure that they have a tool to ensure that they're efficient, structured, and not missing anything, most importantly, about the patient information. So that's certainly, I think, one of the biggest perspectives that we leverage is this is really enhancing your workflows. But ultimately, positioning and socializing the initiative to align with your internal organizational goals and your internal culture is really critical. So ensuring that leaders have a chance to round with their clinicians, ensure that not only they understand what the barriers are from a clinician's perspective in implementing iPass, but also that the clinician understands the goal of the initiative. It's not to add to your work. It is really meant to help make things more streamlined and more structured and safer for your patients. So we've even started to see that at a statewide level. The Kentucky Hospital Association is very generously funding the implementation of iPass at their member institutions for the first 3 years of their implementation. And that to me is really signaling it at a higher level, even just in a unit, in a hospital or a health system, that we need to work towards standard handoff communication and ensure that we have a tool in place to facilitate that, like iPass. And so just ensuring that continued message is there. This is meant to enhance workflows, improve patient safety, and not meant to add work to the plate of any clinician.
Yeah, that's great. I was thinking about how we talk about culture of safety a lot and changing the culture of safety. And it seems like a big, lofty thing, right? It seems like it's almost mysterious of how do you change the culture of safety? But we use the term that, we've kind of adopted Gallup's term of culture being, this is how we do things around here. So if you want to change the culture of safety, you have to change how you do things around here that creates safer care. And so iPass is just a great example of how it seems tactical, right? Versus it being mysterious or lofty. It's just very practical and tactical that if we change how we do things around here, how we hand off and how we communicate handoffs, that we're actually by just doing that, changing culture. So do you agree with me on that?
Right. Right. Yes. Yes, that resonates with me very deeply. iPass is really an actionable tool in the pursuit of improving patient safety and creating that culture of safety. Really, I think one of the bigger things that stands out to me from a teamwork perspective in pursuit of the culture of safety is the trust and accountability that's developed through that shared mental model that the iPass structure provides. So when you're synthesizing a handoff as an oncoming clinician, you know, the giver, the person who's providing the handoff, might notice a critical piece of information was not caught in the synthesis. And iPass gives the structure and the opportunity to say, yes, and don't forget also, I mentioned XYZ. And so it creates that shared accountability in a way that's just expected and creates trust between clinicians that we know we're going to give and receive the information in such a structured way that I can ask when I have a question and I can clarify if something is missing that I feel is critical. That's certainly one way that I think the culture of safety starts to be ingrained in just the way we do things when you have that trust and accountability that's really fostered as part of the process.
Yeah.
There's so many pieces I could dive into, but the trust and accountability piece was really what came up for me. But I think even at an institutional level, if you have a hospital or a health system or a hospital association at a state level saying, we need safer handoffs, that signals this is a priority. And it signals that your organization at whatever level is really dedicated to providing an actionable solution. And I feel that also plays into this trust and accountability piece too, that we don't just want to say this, we want to actually give you a tool to make it happen, which I think is also the signaling there is very important as well.
Yeah. And, you mentioned when you were talking about what's going on at the state level and all of the healthcare organizations having the first 3 years of their implementation supported in that way. I mean, some people might have picked up on that first 3 years. It's like, what? It takes 3 years or more to do this? And I personally am not triggered by that because I know that these kind of changes take time. I mean, I didn't do the research on it. You could look at, Everett Rogers' diffusion curve of how changes get diffused and adopted within entire large groups of people, and even smart, motivated people. It's going to take time, even in small groups, but definitely in larger groups, to really make this is how we do it around here. It's not extra work. It's how we do our work. We can't even imagine doing it any other way. That is a multi-year process. And we know that, with the behavior standards, the 12 positive communication standards, other leadership standards that our partners introduce organization-wide, that it is a multi-year always process. It's not flavor of the month where we start, stop. There's got to be a way to continually work on the diffusion and the adoption of these practices so that people are getting more competent, consistent over time with the practices. So when you're working with a hospital, what signs do you see that they're moving from just training on iPass to truly embedding it into their daily work? Like, I'm sure there's signs and symptoms or something that you see where you're like, oh, we've made it to this part and now we're ready for the next part. So I'm wondering what that kind of looks like in that 3-year process and maybe even beyond, how a diffusion and adoption looks in your healthcare organizations.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Change is certainly a multi-year process. You can't put an iPass poster on the wall and say, hey, go use this and expect that that's going to be effective in actually changing a workflow and changing a behavior. So we have a 3-part process. We spend a solid chunk of time planning and really ensuring that we're setting the organization we're working with up for success. We then move into active implementation where we're really rolling out the IPASS training, collecting data on how clinicians were communicating before versus after IPASS implementation, ensuring they have some of those written tools available to them to sort of help guide their process. And then we sort of reach this phase that we call sustainment. And that is when we look back on our data from the project, we can very easily see, are there different units or departments within the organization who are really adhering to the IPASS structure and some of our quality standards for handoff over time for a long period of time. And so very data driven, we can say a unit or a department has entered the sustainment phase. But I think even more so, what's very telling are, and especially as we think about culture, is this is just how we do things, but it's also this is how we talk about things, right? Clinicians are going to talk to each other. We primarily work with nurses, providers, so physicians and advanced practice providers, as well as respiratory therapists. We have a really strong foundational approach with those three clinician types. But oftentimes what happens is once all of those groups are using IPASS, they might be saying handoffs are going a little smoother, just anecdotally in passing to some of their technician colleagues, to their colleagues in radiology or some of their procedural areas. And you start to hear that, well, we want something like that too. We have a need here too. And so I think that's always a signal to us that things are going very well when we get some of that organic interest from groups who either haven't gone live yet just based on their project plan, or who have expressed interest in wanting to participate. So that's always a very, very strong signal as well. Anecdotally,
yes.
Not as data driven as being able to look at all of our project metrics, but certainly something that I think is displaying the shift in sort of the culture piece as well.
Yeah. I can see that as a good sign for sure. Absolutely. Well, I told you 30 minutes would go by fast, and here we are already at. But as we wrap up, a couple things. First, is there any one specific piece of advice maybe that you would like to leave for healthcare leaders who want to strengthen their culture around more reliable handoff communication?
Yeah. I had trouble boiling it down to just one, so I will lean on my history of as being an overachiever and provide two, if that's okay.
It's okay.
So the first is really a leadership perspective. And I noticed that you mentioned flavor of the month earlier. And sometimes safety initiatives can really feel like that because we're addressing the proximate cause of a safety event. But leaders really need to be able to boldly look at the root causes of miscommunications and patient safety issues more broadly and say, we need to provide our teams with an actionable solution to address this root cause, not just that proximate sort of flavor of the month, more visible issue. So that's certainly a leadership perspective that you have to adopt as an organization. The second is really part of the actionable approach to improving handoff communication. And it can't be done without partnership with your clinical teams. Having shared governance for planning purposes, decision making, and really relying on the insight from your frontline staff and your clinical teams as the subject matter experts to ensure that they are engaged in the change from day one will help ensure that there's a really strong foundation of support and buy-in as you move through the process. And they will be very strong champions for you in this work if they are engaged in the strategic planning from the early days of the project.
Yeah, amen to that. We call it do it with them, not to them. So getting them right from the start, understanding the what, why, and how. And in particular, you mentioned it earlier, the why about it. Sometimes we dive right into this is how we do IPASS. This is what it is. This is how we do it. But really understanding the why so we can really be motivated to change, because as humans, we're pretty comfortable in our own ways of doing things. So those are two great pieces of advice there, Christina. If people want to reach out to learn more about IPASS, maybe even network and connect with you, which I've really much enjoyed getting to know you and having conversations with you around these things that we both are passionate about. So if people want to learn more about iPass or network with you, how can they reach you?
Yeah, definitely. We can always go to our website, our website, which is ipassinstitute.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you're welcome to send me an email if there are some questions and follow up to this conversation that you'd like to explore at christina.hazekamp@ipassinstitute.com.
Fantastic. Thank you for providing such insights and value to our audience of listeners. Each Wednesday, we try to bring value to them through the guests that we have, solo episodes, our coaching episodes, and the like. And so I'm so excited that in the new year, we're starting out with a great guest talking about the culture of safety. Thank you, Christina, for being our guest on this show. And for all of you listeners out there, if you enjoyed this episode, if you know a colleague or somebody in your network that would benefit from hearing this episode, please share it with them. I know that when a colleague sends me a link to an episode, it's the next one I listen to when I'm on my stationary bike. So get this episode to a friend or a colleague that could benefit from learning more about iPass. Thank you again, Christina.
Yeah, and thank you, Sue. I really appreciated the conversation today.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.